Don't worry, you're not only going to see me when there's an X-Men movie to talk about. After all, Fox just got purchased by Marvel, so... Wait, where does that leave me? Rob here from crookedtable.com, host of the Crooked Table podcast, and we're here to talk about Dark Phoenix, the seemingly final entry in Fox's long-running X-Men franchise. After 19 years and about a dozen films, this franchise has run the gamut from near masterpieces like Logan and X2, X-Men United, and really solid entries like Days of Future Past to not so much like X-Men Origins Wolverine, X-Men The Last Stand, which incidentally covered in part the Dark Phoenix saga from Marvel Comics back in the day. This film attempts a different translation of that story, this time with writer-director Simon Kinberg, first-time filmmaker behind the camera, and he's been involved with this franchise a long time, writing several films along the way, including being listed as a co-screenwriter for The Last Stand. So, does this second attempt at Dark Phoenix actually redeem the story's depiction in The Last Stand? Does it prove Simon Kinberg as a solid filmmaker in his own right? And does it end the Fox X-Men slate on a high note? It's my sad duty to report that the answer to all three questions is a resounding no. Now, just to back it up a second, this is the fourth film in the First Class trilogy, which is probably the first problem that this film has going for it. I was actually one of the mild defenders of X-Men Apocalypse, the last one that had Oscar Isaac and Ivan Ooze makeup, and you could see my review of right now on YouTube. Each film in the First Class branch of this multi-faceted franchise has been set in a different decade. And now we're in 1992. I guess somewhere between 1992 and 2000, all these people aged up remarkably. Sophie Turner turned into Famke Janssen, etc. This story picks up with Jean Grey. It hits a lot of similar beats to Last Stand in that it really depicts the reawakening of Jean Grey's Phoenix power. Now, it was hinted at a little bit in Apocalypse, so I kind of thought that they hinted at it nicely at the end of that movie and just let Last Stand, just let it be its own thing and let the Phoenix saga sort of go untold. Unfortunately, they continue the story here. The way the last film ended, Mystique, for some reason, is leading the X-Men. It's the same lineup that we left. The X-Men now are fully embraced superheroes. They're working for the government, in tandem with the government at least. They were recognized as an asset to the world. And that's where the story starts out. So that's part of the stakes that Kinberg sets up right out the gate, is that the X-Men have now ascended past the point of being viewed as the others, being viewed as freaks, and all those other, all the other metaphors that these films have really labeled onto the mutants in this franchise. So it starts out with the X-Men helping out on a space mission. Wow, racist. It's Jean Grey is exposed to a solar flare and stuff starts happening. Without getting into too much specifics, there's a lot of elements here that are covered similarly in X-Men The Last Stand. There is Charles and his deception, trying to protect Jean Grey from herself. There's a revisiting of Jean Grey's past, dealing specifically with her childhood home. There is even sort of a mental confrontation between Charles and the Dark Phoenix as this film goes into. I think to a certain extent, all of that was probably going to be somewhat unavoidable, but it almost feels like direct homages to that earlier film, as if the timeline splinter that occurred in Days of Future Past, where things were changed, that it's kind of a ripple effect. Things have changed, but not 100%. And so I appreciate those little homages to The Last Stand, even though I'm not, obviously, I consider that one of the weaker X-Men films. This mysterious character played by Jessica Chastain, who isn't really divulged very much about in the marketing, at least the marketing materials that I've seen, so I won't get into the true nature of Chastain's character, but she's kind of the X factor, no pun intended, thrown in here amidst the X-Men led by Charles and Cyclops and Magneto and his whole facet of mutants that, spoilers, we meet Magneto in a X-Men movie. Isn't that crazy? I can't believe that. But that's just kind of the broad strokes of the story. I do want to commend Kinberg for making Dark Phoenix Saga the sole focus of this film. There isn't a cure storyline. There isn't the Phoenix saga isn't relegated to some kind of B story in this film. It is the story. Everything revolves around that. There's been a weird disconnect in each of these films in the First Class trilogy, that they pick up with these characters about a decade or so on, so every film is kind of tasked with roping Michael Fassbender's Magneto back into it in some way, shape, or another. And this film suffers the same problem as Apocalypse did, shifting alliances to create some variation on the classic X-Men versus the Brotherhood of Mutants teams. A lot of the elements introduced here, including Chastain's character, including Magneto's storyline, as it were. Not that it really gets much of a storyline, it's just feel really muddled and underdeveloped to me, and nothing is really clarified. So we'll get into more of that in a moment, but just from a story perspective, making the Dark Phoenix saga the sole focus was a good decision, but everything around it just doesn't feel clear, it feels vague because it's trying to be suspenseful, but the level of filmmaking, and again we'll get to there in a minute, isn't sharp enough to make to imbue anything with a certain level of gravitas. It all feels superficial, or kind of like we've tread down this path before, which I think is the fundamental problem in them making not only a fourth film in this trilogy, but also retelling a story that they botched so royally last time. The sole problem with that film wasn't that Dark Phoenix saga was not the only storyline, it's also the way that it handled that storyline, the way that things didn't seem to build naturally, it didn't seem to all fit together, and this film has very much the same problem. As far as the cast here, you have great actors here. James McAvoy, who, in my opinion, deserved an Oscar nomination for Split, and who's really strong in Glass, which I would recommend. I know that might cast aspersions on my taste, just because that film is so divisive, but it has a lot more original things to say than Dark Phoenix does. Michael Fassbender, who is an asset to pretty much every film he's in, and as I said in my Apocalypse review, he sells the emotional beats in a way that this film doesn't really deserve, if that makes sense. Nicholas Hoult, another really gifted actor who you believe that this character is feeling what he's feeling throughout the film. What they did with Beast in this film I thought was probably the most interesting thing they've done with Beast in any of these films to date. I don't think Nicholas Hoult gets to explore that enough. That's a separate problem, but he has at least some framework of material to work with here. And of course, Jennifer Lawrence, who is famously not a huge fan of wearing the blue prosthetics, and seems like she kind of wanted out of this franchise. Spoilers, she's not in this film that much. If you've seen the marketing, you know why. This is very easily a paycheck performance for her, which I can understand. It's not your thing. The Mystique character has been, they basically wrung every interesting thing out of that character by this point. And at least James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, Nicholas Hoult have more substantive things to do. They have a history to draw upon. That continuity carries on pretty well from First Class to Days of Future Past to Apocalypse to Dark Phoenix. It just feels like the fourth part of a three-part story that we really didn't need. And I think that's my biggest issue with it. Ty Sheridan is fine. He doesn't really do anything outstanding in this. He's just basically, your milquetoast X-Men leader that Cyclops tends to be portrayed as, at least in these films. A lot of the other supporting characters, they're there, that they have fun moments in the action scenes, but there isn't much of a character arc for them to track. Something that happens late in the film with Cody McPhee, I didn't really feel earned to me. It felt like the movie was going for a huge character turn, but I didn't feel like the ground was set for that at all. But you can't really fault the young actors for doing the best that they can. Definitely can't fault Chastain for being in this movie. She's great pretty much uniformly. The big problem with the cast of this film, at least, really lies in Sophie Turner. Like, this character, her Jean Grey, has never really carried she's never really carried that character in the way that Famke Janssen did in those first couple of movies. But she doesn't really get a lot of depth to this character. She switches back to being scared of herself and her power. That scene you see in the trailer of her like shivering in the rain, being like, "Why did you do that?" And really pissed off and kind of stone-faced, getting all veiny, a little bit of Dark Willow magic happening there in the confrontation scenes. And that's pretty much, she's either set at A or set at B. There's not a lot of range in between there. So the cast of this film is fine. I don't think Sophie Turner rises to the occasion of really being the central title character of this film and carrying it in the way that it needs to be carried, in the way that someone like Hugh Jackman has carried him, in the way that someone like James McAvoy or Michael Fassbender or even Jennifer Lawrence in Days of Future Past. She was really kind of the central character of that movie in some ways, and I think that she did a pretty solid job in that film. That felt like the last time that she really cared about Mystique's character at all. So you can't really fault the cast so much for the failings of this film. What I really think it comes down to is the production side of things. As I said, the script is all over the place. The production, the action scenes are either really dark or cut together really fast or just not well staged whatsoever. I mean, this is the first time directorial effort from Simon Kinberg, and it shows. It doesn't really feel like you're taken on the ride with these characters. It feels like they're on a mission and you're just like, huh, what's happening now? This is what we're doing? Oh, okay, whatever. And that's kind of my level of engagement throughout the film. There are some moments that are laugh out loud, not intentionally. There are some moments that there are little bits of fun where they do use the powers in a fun way. And I really love the way that there are a few instances, a couple instances at least, in the movie where the X-Men use their powers to come together. They found ways to have those all fit together so that this group of children, this group of young people has become a cohesive team. They've been on missions in between Apocalypse and this film, and they know how to work together to achieve their goal in the quickest and safest method possible. I just feel like the story here rehashes some elements from The Last Stand, but doesn't really add anything particularly new to them. And it's just really, I mean, this is the 12th X-Men movie, the 7th proper team film, and I really feel like there is an element of been there, done that in pretty much every moment of this movie. There's a lot of callbacks in this film, but I don't feel like they add up too much. If you're going to use the term fan service, like so many people were using about Avengers Endgame, which uses that to build upon things, to build upon what we know about those characters, what we've seen in the other films, and bring them to a head. This film tried to do that and failed miserably. So really disappointing seeing Dark Phoenix turn out this way. And I would say for diehard fans, definitely go out and check it out, but I feel like more casual moviegoers are going to be really disappointed. So it's unfortunate that this is the situation that we leave the X-Men in, but who knows what's going to happen when they join the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So, I mean, I don't expect we're going to see anything with the X-Men or the Fantastic Four for that matter for a while. After everything that's going on with Endgame, I think Marvel really needs to recalibrate. And just an aside, for those of you who hated that she's got help moment in Endgame, there's a real groan-inducing one early on in X-Men Dark Phoenix. And, I loved Captain Marvel and I'm all for feminism, but man, this was a really bad attempt at Simon Kinberg's part of making that a thing in this movie. But to just eulogize the Fox X-Men franchise, because who knows if we're ever going to see the New Mutants. Overall, I feel like these 12 films have been pretty solid. I mean, the only few that I would say are really, there's maybe 3 or 4 that I would say are the ones that really did not stick the landing. And unfortunately, Dark Phoenix happens to be one of them. It does feel to a certain extent that with the movies that they really did right, it does feel like Fox has always been on some level afraid of the comics. There are elements in this movie where you can feel they want to distance themselves from the source material. And that's something that Marvel Studios has really taken the opposite approach on. They've really embraced it as much as possible and made movie-going public comics fans rather than trying to please comics fans and the movie-going public as separate entities, not treating them that way. Marvel has united those two, and Fox has never really done that. They're ashamed of the fact that these characters in this film series is based in the comic books. But as for Dark Phoenix, it really does feel like Fox was trying to get the last little drops of potential profit that they could out of this IP before it's wrested from their hands. Those are my thoughts on Dark Phoenix. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of the film. If you saw it, who knows what the box office is going to be like for this one. Find more podcasts, videos, reviews, and other movie-related goodies over at crookedtable.com. This has been a Crooked Table video, and I've been Rob.